Hello, everybody. You can hear me. My talk is on glyphosate's negative effects on the ecosystem. I want to say a big shout out to Meryl Nass for organizing this symposium. It has been awesome so far. I really enjoyed listening to the speakers. Everybody has a different message to make. So please go on with my first slide. My outline is going to be first an introduction. Then I'm going to talk about the toxic effects of glyphosate, harm to the ecosystem. And I'm going to use Florida as an example of how glyphosate is destroying creating lots of problems in the ecosystem in Florida. And finally, a conclusion. So introduction. First of all, of course, you all probably know by now what glyphosate is. It's becoming a household word. I'm really happy to see that. The amount of glyphosate used every year in the United States today is equivalent to 1 pound for every man, woman, and child. An astonishing amount. Glyphosate is the most used herbicide on the planet. U.S. is a big leader that uses more than any other country. It can kill the dandelions in your yard. A lot of people use it residentially, but of course, the big deal to me is the food system. And people know about the Roundup Ready crops, corn, soy, canola, sugar beets, cotton, tobacco, and alfalfa. Those crops resist the glyphosate because of genetic engineering, so it can be sprayed all over the crop. It gets into the food supply. But I also want to point out, next slide, that the people think if they buy non-GMO, that's safe, and that's not true at all. In fact, the highest levels of glyphosate are showing up on non-GMO crops, including wheat, oats, barley, rye, sugarcane, beans, lentils, peas, flax, sunflowers, pulses, and chickpeas. Roundup is being used as a desiccant right before harvest. And so because of that, it goes into the seed. It increases the yield by synchronizing the release of the going to seed of the crop as it dies. And then it ends up very high levels are showing up in these non-GMO foods. So I just want to give you a brief history of glyphosate. It's now the #1 herbicide in use in the United States, is increasingly being used around the world. It was patented by Monsanto in 1969, so it's been around for a long time. Introduced into the U.S. food chain in 1974. It came out from under patent in 2000. The price went down and became a more global product at that time. In fact, China is using a lot more now than it used to. For example, it inhibits an enzyme in the shikimate pathway, which is a biological pathway not found in human cells. This is the argument Monsanto uses to say it's safe for us. But the shikimate pathway is used by many of our gut microbes, and they produce essential amino acids, tryptophan, tyrosine, and phenylalanine. And these amino acids are part of the building blocks of proteins, but they're also precursors to some incredibly important biologically active molecules. So there's been a huge expansion of GMO corn, soy, cotton, canola crops, and that's led to a sharp increase in the use of glyphosate in the last 2 decades. And so here's a chart of the use of glyphosate related to superweeds. I think that the superweeds drove the increased use of glyphosate on those GMO crops because they found year after year that the crops were more and more resistant. They had to use more and more glyphosate. And so that glyphosate's gone up exponentially since 1990. When those crops were first introduced around 1997, you can see that the use of glyphosate started going up at an accelerated rate. These crops, these resistant weeds are finally at this point becoming such a crisis that they're having to introduce some of the other herbicides back into the market along with the glyphosate, such as dicamba, and these are causing additional problems today. Superweeds are now a huge problem, and this is a quote from a farmer. First of all, 76.8% of samples submitted to a clinic, to an Illinois plant clinic in 2017 from 10 states showed 78% had glyphosate resistance. So these weeds are all over the place in our today. And this quote, GM crops are on the edge of failure in the United States as farmers are asked to fork out more and more money on herbicides to try to control the superweeds. And we simply can't afford it. It's near the end of the road for these crops. And many of my friends in the Midwest are on the edge of turning back to conventional farming methods. And I think that's good news because I hope that's what they will do shortly. Next slide. So just some pictures of some foods. And you can see many of these foods. These are foods that have been found to have high levels of glyphosate, not thanks to the U.S. government. They don't bother to measure, but activists have been measuring, such as Zen Honeycutt, have been finding high levels of glyphosate in common foods, and particularly things like goldfish crackers and Oreo cookies and Cheerios. These are things that children eat a lot of. So our kids are being heavily exposed to glyphosate. Glyphosate was found in this study in 59% of honey samples. And what you can see is that these are all the samples across different parts of the world. And next slide will show you that the United States is a big winner. We see all the highest levels of glyphosate are showing up in the foods, in the honey produced in the United States. So next topic, toxic effects of glyphosate. Is glyphosate non-toxic? Monsanto has argued that glyphosate is harmless to humans because our cells don't have that shikimate biological pathway. However, our gut bacteria do have this pathway, and we depend upon them to supply us with essential amino acids produced through that pathway, and with many other nutrients, such as vitamins and short-chain fatty acids. The gut microbes are being majorly disrupted by glyphosate, and this is causing all kinds of dysbiosis problems. And we're seeing today a huge number of papers discussing all the various problems with the gut microbes. We're becoming very aware of them because I think glyphosate is a primary player in this disruption of our gut microbiome to cause all kinds of diseases. Other ingredients in Roundup greatly increase glyphosate's toxic effects, and they are toxic in and of themselves. There's insidious effects of glyphosate. It's a slow kill, and most studies are too short to detect the damage. That's how they got by with the approval process. 3 successful U.S. lawsuits claiming that glyphosate caused non-Hodgkin's lymphoma are bringing public awareness to glyphosate's toxicity. And now there are tens of thousands of other people causing trouble for Bayer, who has now bought Monsanto. They're trying to figure out how to do deals with these people who are all claiming that glyphosate caused their non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Here's a paper. There's actually many papers coming out now showing the connection between glyphosate and the gut microbiome, including in insects such as the bees. And this particular nice quote from this paper discusses this. And of course, my book, Toxic Legacy, I have a whole chapter on the gut. That book is completely about glyphosate and its effect on our humans and the ecosystem. This quote from this paper: in this work, we state a possible link between glyphosate-induced dysbiosis, and that's gut dysbiosis, and cognitive and motor aggravations in neurodegenerative and neurodevelopmental pathologies, such as autism. And hence, we review the negative impact that glyphosate-induced dysbiosis may have on depression, anxiety, autism, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's disease. And I believe that glyphosate is the primary cause of the autism epidemic today in America. So here's just this is a paper that I wrote together with Anthony Samso. We collaborated on 6 papers published in the research literature. And this was specifically on celiac disease. Celiac disease has become an epidemic. Everyone knows about gluten intolerance these days. You've got big sections of the grocery store selling gluten-free products. This is a graph of glyphosate usage on wheat, specifically on wheat, compared to celiac disease in the United States. And you can see that the 2 curves match quite well. It actually matches much better than glyphosate use on corn and soy, which you would expect because celiac disease is a wheat problem. And there's another chart. And I want to say Nancy Swanson published this article together with collaborators in 2014, quite a long time ago. This article is amazing and has like 30 different charts of various diseases that are going up dramatically in time, exactly in step with the rise in glyphosate usage on core crops. And inflammatory bowel disease is one of those diseases. This shows the graph here. The yellow is the glyphosate. The glyphosate is the red line, and then the disease is shown with the yellow boxes over time. Next topic, glyphosate harm to the ecosystem. So I want to talk about, first of all, about water fleas. Water fleas are very important in the ecosystem because they're at the bottom of the food chain. And this was a lovely talk by Supa et al. In 2020. By the way, I've seen a lot of nice papers coming out very recently on glyphosate use at low levels causing problems in various animal species. This was water fleas. And of course, tadpoles, salamanders, newts, and aquatic insects, many types of small fish feed on the water fleas. And then, of course, other things feed on those, and you go up the food chain. So everybody's passing the glyphosate around. When the water fleas were exposed to concentrations of Roundup and glyphosate well below the approved regulatory threshold, they saw all kinds of problems: embryonic developmental failure, systemic inflammation, collagen degradation, impaired wound healing, and a disrupted gut microbiome. And so the animals that eat water fleas pick up the glyphosate, pass it up to the next level, and everybody's getting exposed. Now here's a paper about bees, and I want to put a shout out for Don Huber. Professor Don Huber was the person who first introduced me to glyphosate in a 2-hour presentation. I was blown away, 2012. And he's been saying for a long time, glyphosate is a major player in bee colony collapse syndrome. And I think he's right. And this is a paper by some other people in 2021, again, very recent. And the conclusions from this study: we provide new information on the influence of commercially formulated glyphosate at the recommended concentration on the behaviors of honeybees. Our findings show that the water responsiveness, sucrose responsiveness, that's sugar, learning and memory ability, and climbing ability of honeybees were all affected by commercially formulated glyphosate at or below the recommended concentration. So again, low levels of glyphosate causing harm to the bees. And here's a paper on worms. This is on roundworms. Glyphosate-based herbicides reduce the activity and reproduction of, or this is earthworms, and lead to increased soil nutrient concentrations. This was a fun paper where they actually put these worms into these containers, and then they exposed the crop to glyphosate. And they were expecting actually that the worms would thrive because there would be more raw nutrients available in the soil. But actually the worms got hurt by the glyphosate. And they found that they sort of became paralyzed because they couldn't go up. They needed to go up to the surface. These worms are very active at going up and down and actually churning up the soil and making it healthy. Their surface casting activity almost ceased 3 weeks after herbicide application. And then they found a huge increase in the soil concentrations of nitrate and phosphate as a consequence of this herbicide application. This is very, very important because nitrates are a huge part of the global climate change problem. Nitrogen is actually much, much worse than carbon, nitrogen oxides, in the global warming. And so the nitrogen is not getting absorbed by the plants, actually. And that's another problem. The glyphosate disrupts the uptake because it disrupts the microbes, the nitrogen-fixing microbes as well. Again, I talk about some of this in my book. So this is a serious risk of nutrient leaching into streams, lakes, or groundwater aquifers. And a quote, reductions in mixing of organic litter within the soil, that's the mixing done by these moving around earthworms, will limit long-term soil microbial activity and the soil nutrient cycling and availability, all of which may lead to reductions in plant productivity. So exposure to glyphosate, this is the one about the roundworms, leads to degeneration of gamma aminobutyric acid and dopamine neurons in these roundworms. And so this is linked to Parkinson's disease. I think Parkinson's disease in the earthworms and the roundworms and in the humans, because the farmers, agricultural workers, have been shown to have an increased risk of Parkinson's disease as associated with glyphosate exposure. And then, so this particular study used Touchdown, which is a glyphosate-containing herbicide, and chronic exposure to Touchdown led to degeneration of dopaminergic and GABAergic neurons in the brainstem nuclei of these roundworms, which is, of course, then connected very much to Parkinson's disease. And a manganese-containing fungicide also damaged these neurons. This is an interesting paper about cows, and they were looking at minerals in the cows and in the level of minerals in their blood supply, in their blood. And they had 8 different farms, and each of the farms had some cows. So each of these letters here, WKRV, is a farm. On the far right, you have the minimum and maximum expected level of these minerals. And the minerals are cobalt on the top and manganese on the bottom. So you can see that cobalt has completely disappeared in the blood of these. And cobalt is cobalamin. Cobalamin is a critical enzyme that depends upon cobalt to work properly. It's going to be in trouble without adequate cobalt. And the manganese, of course, is also very important as a mineral, to keep the animals healthy. So both of them are way below the minimum level that you would expect in these cows. And that's because glyphosate chelates minerals and makes them unavailable. So next is an example. This is my final topic before my conclusions: Florida agriculture and waterways. So glyphosate accumulates in biofilms. This is an amazing paper from 2021. I was really surprised to see this. What they did was they found that if you have water that has a lot of vegetation in it, biofilms, and you put glyphosate into the water, the glyphosate gets sucked up by the vegetation. They found that the concentrations of glyphosate in the biofilms were 2 to 4 orders of magnitude higher than those in the surrounding water. So it appears that the glyphosate has disappeared. You think, oh my goodness, they broke it down. That's awesome. But that's not true. It's accumulating in the biomass, and the biomass is the food supply for many animals that are going to get poisoned by it at a concentrated level. So these juvenile fish and the amphibians that live in the biofilms are going to be hurt badly by this glyphosate. And a quote from this paper: we may be under-recognizing the potential ecological risk of contaminants like glyphosate that are bioconcentrating in biofilms and subsequently being consumed. So this is it's a sad story about the manatees in Florida. I've been following it. I've actually published an article on it together with Jennifer Margulis. Chronic exposure to glyphosate in Florida manatees. The manatees are very sick. They're getting sicker and sicker with each year. Glyphosate is ubiquitous in the Florida waterways. They use it actually to control invasive water weeds, as well as using it in the sugarcane fields around those waterways, and of course the homes that are heavily using it residentially to kill the dandelions. Florida manatees exposed to glyphosate have increasing body burden since 2009. This study actually looked at their body burden over time and saw that it was going up. The manatees are sick and they're starving due to the loss of seagrass, and that's due to the disruption of the ecosystem in the waterways, because you get all these cyanobacteria overgrowing and algae and blocking the sunlight so that the seagrass can't grow, but also the seagrass is probably soaking up the glyphosate because of this issue with the biofilms. Is agriculture's use of glyphosate feeding Lake O's explosive algae blooms? This was an article. Again, talking about sugarcane agriculture, extensive all around Lake Okeechobee, which is in South Florida. Glyphosate is used to control the weeds and as a desiccant for the sugarcane, and also, of course, used to control the weeds in the waterways themselves. It's added to the water. Cyanobacteria are called blue-green algae, but they're actually a bacterium. They can break down the CP bond. That's a difficult biological bond that's in glyphosate, carbon phosphorus. Most animals are stumped by it, but these cyanobacteria can break it down. That means they can use the phosphorus as a source of phosphorus. They flourish. They feed on glyphosate, and they do very well. And so they grow. There are too many cyanobacteria appearing in the waterways. And so basically the cyanobacteria, this is again going up the food chain. There's lots of cyanobacteria. The red tide algae love it. So this becomes a very good nutrient for them. They can take advantage of the nitrogen products that are produced, the nitrates that are produced by the cyanobacteria. So both the coastal red tide and the inland blue-green algae have beset South Florida through the summer, killing vast numbers of fish and other wildlife, including dozens of dolphins, manatees, sea turtles, sharks, and eels. And so these cyanobacteria feed off the glyphosate. They get the phosphorus. They produce nitrates from nitrogen. Glyphosate is also a supplier of nitrogen. And then the red tide algae flourish and cause trouble. Thanks to Zen Honeycutt, we're getting information, direct evidence that this is happening. And so she actually, Bombs Across America, obtained a water sample from the coast of Cape Coral at the mouth of the Caloosahatchee River, where there were cyanobacteria present. And so your level here on the left is the level that she obtained from this sample, compared to a sample from Sacramento municipal drinking water, which was much, much lower. And the max residue level allowed in Europe is even lower than what's in the Sacramento water. She also tested Florida orange juice samples, and they also tested positive for glyphosate. So glyphosate excessive use chronically disrupts the shikimate pathway and can affect photosynthesis and yield in citrus trees. This is a great paper. I highly recommend it. It was published in 2022, very recent. And I'm really glad that these kinds of papers are being done finally. I think for a long time they thought glyphosate was safe. Researchers didn't want to invest in studying glyphosate because they just get a negative result. Now they realize this chemical is not safe. And so they're able to study, they're able to find problems. And in this case, they looked at citrus plants and where glyphosate was being heavily used. And even with no phytotoxicity symptoms, they showed inhibited growth and fruit yield. So what they're showing is that glyphosate is disrupting the metabolism of these plants. And they exposed the glyphosate to the leaves at the bottom of the plant, and they showed that it then worked up into the top of the plant and showed up all over the crop. It really gets into the tissues of the plant, which is why you can't wash it off. And of course, shikimate accumulated because it's disrupting the shikimate pathway. It reduced the assimilation of carbon dioxide. That is very, very important because the plants are able to capture carbon dioxide from the air and dump it into the soil ultimately to help with a climate problem, to reduce the carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere. And this, I think, is really, really important because we've got all these crops all around the world where they're using glyphosate, and glyphosate disrupts their ability to capture carbon from the air. And I think this may be a much bigger player in the climate change problem than we have realized so far. And so they showed that it got oxidative damage from the sun. It wasn't able to utilize photosynthesis efficiently, and so it wasn't able to convert carbon dioxide into organic matter. And I want to point out in my book, I talk about an enzyme called rubisco. It's a fun enzyme. It's the most common protein on the planet. It's the most common protein. It's present in every plant that does photosynthesis, and it plays a crucial role in photosynthesis. And multiple papers have shown that glyphosate suppresses this rubisco enzyme. So that's really, really crucial because it's messing up photosynthesis in the plants, decreasing their ability to capture the carbon in the soil, into the soil. And then we went, okay, so then concerns about glyphosate in citrus. This, I think, is my last slide before the summary. Chief among these concerns are increased crop sensitivity to diseases, reduced availability of micronutrients to the crops, such as nitrates, and through chelation by glyphosate, you're losing a lot of the minerals. And that's another thing Don Huber had shown, that the glyphosate greatly reduces the mineral uptake into the plants, which means they're deficient in minerals when we eat their products. It inhibited the root growth, and it's causing an epidemic in citrus fruit drop, which is a pathogenic agent that's destroying the citrus crop in Florida. This is another thing that Don Huber has identified, and he's worked with farmers there in Florida, and he's shown that if they go organic, the citrus fruit drop problem disappears. And so this quote says, as citrus weed management programs have continued to rely more heavily on glyphosate, the occurrence of citrus fruit drop resulting from glyphosate application has become an increasing grower concern over the years. So in summary, glyphosate is pervasive in our environment, and it's a significant contributor to human health issues and harm to the ecosystem. Its usage on core crops has increased dramatically over the past 2 decades, in step with a dramatic increase in the number of human diseases and conditions. Multiple species of animals, including water fleas, earthworms, bees, cows, manatees, etc., are being harmed. Glyphosate disturbs the nutrients in the soil, chelating minerals, interfering with nitrogen uptake and photosynthesis. Agriculture in Florida is leading to algae blooms, citrus greening, and harm to the Florida manatees. And thank you for your time.